Stockholm Syndrome. You're trapped. Hours turn into days. The person with the gun decides if you eat, if you sleep, if you live. At first, pure terror. Then something shifts. He brings you water. You feel grateful. He speaks to you like a human being. You feel seen. When the police finally break through, you're not relieved. You're protecting him. It has a name. Stockholm Syndrome. In 1973, hostages in a Swedish bank defended their captors even after rescue. Not sympathy. Survival. When your life depends entirely on the person threatening you, your brain rewrites the rules. The mechanism is brutal. Someone has absolute power over you. Your mind does what it must to keep you breathing. You scan for humanity. A moment of kindness becomes proof they're not evil. A brief conversation feels like connection. Your brain rewrites the story because hope is the only tool left when there's no escape. The shift creeps in. First, you stop seeing them as pure threat. Then you notice their side. They seem stressed, desperate, not monstrous. Trapped in their own way. The empathy isn't a choice. It's your nervous system reducing danger by building a bond, any bond, with the person deciding if you survive the hour. This pattern repeats beyond hostages. A woman can't leave her abuser, so she defends his anger. A prisoner of war starts seeing his captor's perspective. An employee under a controlling boss justifies the cruelty. A child raised by a violent parent protects them in therapy. The formula never changes when escape feels impossible and survival hinges on someone's mood. The mind bends to protect them. The cruelest part comes after. The threat ends, but the bond stays. Freed hostages testify in favor of their captors. Survivors minimize what happened. People who escape abusive marriages feel guilt instead of relief. The attachment was never about the captor being good. It was the brain doing everything it could to survive. Stockholm Syndrome isn't weakness. It's the emergency override when powerlessness becomes permanent. The mind rewrites reality so dependency feels like loyalty, survival feels like choice. And once that rewrite locks in, the person living inside it can't always see the difference. Capgras Syndrome. Your mother walks through the door. Same face, same voice. Same way she says your name. But every nerve in your body screams wrong. You know, with absolute certainty that this is not her. An imposter. A copy. Something wearing her skin. It's called Capgras Syndrome. A delusion where the brain recognizes a face but loses the emotional signal that makes it real. The features match. The feeling doesn't. And without that feeling, the mind reeks for the only explanation left: replacement. Here's what breaks. Normally, seeing someone you love fires two systems. One names the face. The other floods you with familiarity, warmth, the sensation of them. In Capgras, recognition works. Emotion doesn't. The circuit snaps. The person looks right but feels empty. And because humans trust feeling over logic, the brain decides they must be fake. The conviction is absolute, not doubt, certainty. Patients describe a flawless replica. A double who's memorized every detail. They point out differences that don't exist. A mole shifted slightly. Eyes a shade darker. Anything to confirm what they know: the real person is gone. The delusion doesn't spread evenly. It targets the closest people. The husband of 30 years becomes a stranger the moment he walks in. The mother who raised you feels like an actor. A child's face turns unfamiliar. But a neighbor passing by might register as normal. The deeper the bond should be, the sharper the wrongness feels. What makes it unbearable is the isolation. Everyone insists nothing changed. Family swears it's really them. Doctors confirm no switch happened. But for the person caught in Capgras, reassurance deepens the horror. If no one else sees it, the conspiracy runs deeper. Or worse, they're the only one who knows, and no one will believe them. The syndrome surfaces after brain injuries, strokes, dementia, schizophrenia. It's neurological misfiring. But to the person inside it, the world itself fractured. Recognition without anchor. Sight stripped of connection. Familiar faces drained of everything that made them home. Capgras doesn't just warp perception. It severs the thread between seeing and knowing, leaving someone alone in a reality where the people they love have been quietly replaced by strangers who learn to imitate them perfectly. Impostor Syndrome. The promotion comes through. The award gets announced. Your name in the headline. Everyone's congratulating you. And all you can think is, when will they figure out I don't belong here? Impostor Syndrome. The persistent belief that your success is a fluke, that you've fooled everyone into thinking you're competent when you're not. That any moment now, someone will expose you as the fraud you know yourself to be. It doesn't come from failure. It comes from achievement. The higher you climb, the louder the voice gets. Every success becomes evidence of how well you've tricked people. Every compliment feels like proof they don't really see you. Because if they did, they'd know you're just pretending. The pattern starts early. You work harder than everyone around you. Not because you're driven, but because you're terrified of being found out. You overprepare. You second guess. You attribute wins to luck, timing, other people's help. Anything but your own ability. When something goes well, you think you got away with it. When something fails, you think the truth finally surfaced. It shows up everywhere. The PhD student surrounded by brilliant peers, convinced admissions made a mistake. The executive who built a company from nothing, certain she's one decision away from collapse. The artist whose work hangs in galleries, sure that real talent would feel different than this. The athlete breaking records, waiting for the day his body exposes what his mind already knows. What makes it vicious is that evidence doesn't help. Achievements pile up. Accolades accumulate. None of it registers as proof of competence. Each success just raises the stakes. Now you have more to lose when the truth comes out. Now the fall will be worse. So you work harder, achieve more, and feel like a fraud even deeper. Impostor Syndrome doesn't question your success. It accepts your success and decides you stole it, that you're an actor playing a role, that everyone else earned their place, but you slipped through on a technicality. And the more you succeed, the more you're convinced you've simply gotten better at lying. Othello Syndrome. She's 10 minutes late. No big deal. Except your mind is already building the case. Traffic doesn't take 10 minutes. She said she'd text. She didn't text. That means she's hiding something. And if she's hiding something, it's because she's with someone else. Othello Syndrome. Morbid jealousy. The unshakable, delusional belief that your partner is unfaithful. Not suspicion. Certainty. Certainty. Built on nothing but the stories your mind won't stop constructing. Named after Shakespeare's tragedy where Othello murders his wife over imagined infidelity, the syndrome operates on the same logic. Jealousy doesn't need evidence. It generates its own. A delayed text becomes proof. A neutral smile at a coworker becomes confirmation. The absence of signs gets reinterpreted as evidence of how carefully they're hiding it. The accusations start small. Where were you? Who were you with? Why didn't you answer? At first, explanations satisfy. But soon every answer fuels more questions. You said you were at the store. Which store? Why that one? Who else was there? The interrogation never ends because no answer will ever be enough. Then the monitoring begins. Checking phones. Tracking locations. Showing up unannounced. Demanding access to messages, emails, call logs. Not because evidence was found. Because the absence of evidence just means they're getting better at hiding it. The surveillance intensifies, the accusations escalate, and reality bends to fit the delusion. It surfaces in long-term relationships that were stable for years. In marriages where no infidelity ever occurred. In partnerships where trust was never broken. The syndrome doesn't require betrayal. It invents it. A husband accuses his wife of decades of sleeping with neighbors, co-workers, strangers. A girlfriend becomes convinced her partner maintains secret lives in other cities. The delusion grows until it consumes everything. What makes it destructive is the spiral. Accusations breed resentment. Resentment creates distance. Distance becomes proof of guilt. The relationship deteriorates not because of infidelity, but because the accusation itself poisons what was there. And when it finally ends, the person with Othello Syndrome doesn't see the pattern. They see vindication. They were right all along. Othello Syndrome doesn't protect relationships. It dismantles them, one invented betrayal at a time, until nothing's left but the wreckage and the unshaken belief that it was all real. Jerusalem Syndrome. You're walking through the old city. Stones that have stood for millennia. The weight of history pressing down. You've read about this place your whole life. Now you're here, and suddenly it's not enough to just visit. You're not a tourist anymore. You're John the Baptist. You have a message. The world needs to hear it. Now, Jerusalem Syndrome. A psychological break triggered by visiting Jerusalem. Tourists, pilgrims, travelers with no prior history of mental illness suddenly develop religious delusions, hallucinations, messianic convictions. They believe they're biblical figures. They hear divine commands. They strip off modern clothes to wear robes. They preach in the streets. They're convinced they've been chosen for a sacred mission. It doesn't discriminate by faith. Christians think they're Jesus or Mary. Jews believe they're prophets. Secular visitors suddenly adopt religious identities they never held before. The city itself becomes the catalyst. The collision of religious significance, historical intensity, and personal expectation creates a rupture. The break follows a pattern. First, intense anxiety and nervousness. Then, a compulsion to separate from the group, to be alone. Next comes an obsessive need for cleanliness, ritual bathing preparation. Finally, the delusion crystallizes. The person dons white robes, often torn from hotel sheets. They march to sacred sites. They deliver sermons. They sing hymns. They act out biblical scenes as if they're living them. It's not limited to the unstable. Lawyers, teachers, engineers. People who function normally for decades. They arrive in Jerusalem, and within days something snaps. The architecture, the prayers echoing from different faiths, the sheer density of meaning condensed into a few square miles. It overwhelms, and the mind reeks for the only framework that makes sense of religious identity. Most cases resolve when the person leaves the city. Within a week of departing Jerusalem, the delusion fades. They return to themselves, often with little memory of what they believed or why. As if the city held them in a trance that breaks the moment they cross the boundary back into ordinary life. Jerusalem Syndrome isn't faith. It's the psyche collapsing under the weight of expectation, history, and meaning, then rebuilding itself into something unrecognizable until distance stores what proximity destroyed. Paris Syndrome. You've dreamed about this for years. Paris, the city of light, elegant cafes, romantic streets, art and beauty at every corner. You saved, you planned, you imagined exactly how it would feel. And then you arrive. The streets smell like urine. The subway is packed and no one makes eye contact. A waiter is rude when you ask for help. The Eiffel Tower is surrounded by crowds and barricades. Nothing looks like the photos. Nothing feels like the dream. And suddenly, your chest tightens. You can't breathe. The disappointment is so severe it becomes physical. Paris Syndrome. A psychological disorder primarily affecting Japanese tourists, though it can strike anyone whose expectations collide violently with reality. We're not talking about mild letdown. We're talking panic attacks, hallucinations, derealization, full psychotic breaks requiring emergency repatriation. The Japanese embassy in Paris keeps a 24-hour hotline specifically for this. Every year, dozens of tourists need psychiatric intervention. Some are hospitalized. They arrived expecting a fantasy and encountered a city. A real, flawed, indifferent city that never promised to fulfill their projections. The gap between expectation and reality is the trigger. Decades of films, advertisements, romanticized media built an image of Paris as perfect, magical, transformative. The collision happens fast. Linguistic barriers make communication harder. Cultural differences feel like rejection. The grandeur imagined doesn't match the grit experienced. And for some, that gap is too much for the mind to process. It fractures. Symptoms escalate quickly. Anxiety spirals in depersonalization. The feeling that nothing is real, that you've slipped into a wrong version of the world. Hallucinations sometimes follow. Delusions that people are persecuting you. Acute paranoia. The idealized Paris still exists somewhere in your mind, and the real Paris feels like a betrayal so profound it triggers a break. Treatment is removal. Get them out of Paris. Back to the airport, back home. Within days, sometimes hours, the symptoms fade. The delusion loses its grip once the source of the dissonance is gone. It's not the city itself. It's the confrontation between what was promised and what is. Paris syndrome doesn't happen because Paris is terrible. It happens because the dream was too perfect. And when reality couldn't compete with fantasy, the mind chose fantasy, even if that meant losing its grip on what's real. Savant Syndrome. He can't tie his shoes. Can't read a clock. Struggles with basic conversation. But sit him at a piano he's never touched, and he plays Chopin perfectly after hearing it once. No lessons. No practice. Just immediate, flawless execution. Savant Syndrome. Extraordinary ability emerging from severe cognitive impairment. The brain trades general function for hyper-specialized genius. Memory that captures every detail of a city seen once. Mathematical calculations performed faster than computers. Artistic skill that produces masterworks without training, but paired with challenges that make daily life nearly impossible without help. The pattern is specific. About half of savants are autistic. Others have brain injuries, developmental disabilities, conditions that rewire how the brain processes information. The abilities cluster in predictable areas: music, art, mathematics, calendar calculation, mechanical or spatial reasoning. Not broad intelligence. Narrow, intense, almost obsessive mastery of one domain. What's extraordinary is the mismatch. A person who can't understand social cues can reproduce an entire symphony after one listen. Someone who can't navigate a conversation can calculate the day of the week for any date in history instantly. An individual who struggles with abstract thought can draw an entire cityscape from memory with architectural precision. The mechanism isn't fully understood. One theory: when parts of the brain are damaged or underdeveloped, other regions compensate by amplifying specific functions. The brain routes resources, sacrificing breadth for depth. Another theory points to reduced filtering. Most brains discard sensory details automatically. Savant brains might retain everything, allowing pattern recognition and recall that seem superhuman. Kim Peek, the inspiration for Rain Man, memorized over 12,000 books word for word but couldn't button his own shirt. Stephen Wiltshire draws entire cities in perfect detail after a single helicopter ride but needs support for basic tasks. Leslie Lemke, blind and cognitively impaired, plays any piece of music flawlessly after hearing it once. The ability is real. The cost is equally real. Savant syndrome doesn't compensate for disability. It coexists with it. Genius in one sliver of human experience, profound limitation everywhere else. The brain reconfigured in ways that science still struggles to explain. Peter Pan Syndrome. He's 35. Still lives with his parents. No steady job. No long-term plans. Spends money on games, hobbies, things that feel good right now. Talks about starting that business someday. Going back to school eventually. But nothing happens. Time passes. Responsibilities pile up, and he keeps waiting for life to feel less overwhelming before he actually starts living it. Peter Pan Syndrome. The refusal to grow up. not immaturity. A psychological resistance to the responsibilities, commitments, and emotional complexity of adulthood. The person stays functionally dependent, avoiding anything that requires sustained effort, accountability, or discomfort. It's not a clinical diagnosis, but the pattern is clear. Difficulty holding jobs. Inability to maintain long-term relationships. Financial dependence on others, usually parents. A life structure that looks more like adolescence than adulthood, not because of incapacity, but because adult demands feel unbearable. The avoidance is selective. They can be charming, intelligent, capable in areas that interest them. But the moment something requires sacrifice, discipline, or facing consequences, they retreat. Romantic relationships end when things get serious. Jobs quit when expectations increase. Plans collapse when follow-through becomes necessary. What drives it varies. Sometimes it's fear. Adulthood means failure is possible, and staying a perpetual beginner means never being judged. Sometimes it's comfort. Parents who enable dependency make avoidance easier than growth. Sometimes it's a refusal to accept that life isn't what was imagined. The fantasy of endless possibility feels better than committing to one limited reality. The cost shows up in others. Partners exhausted from carrying the relationship. Parents who can't retire because their adult child still needs support. Friends who stop inviting someone who never shows up or flakes at the last minute. The person with Peter Pan syndrome doesn't feel the weight because they've outsourced it. And here's the trap. The longer it continues, the harder it becomes to change. Skills atrophy. Opportunities narrow. Peers move forward. The gap widens until catching up feels impossible, which reinforces the avoidance. Staying stuck becomes the only option that doesn't require confronting how far behind they've fallen. Peter Pan syndrome isn't about refusing to age. It's about refusing to participate. And the fantasy of staying young forever quietly becomes a life that never actually starts. Cotard Syndrome. You know you're dead. Not metaphorically. Not philosophically. Literally. Your heart doesn't beat. Your blood doesn't flow. You're a corpse that somehow still moves. Or maybe you don't exist at all. You're a shell, an illusion, nothing inside. The world continues, but you're not part of it anymore. You stop being real, and no one else has noticed yet. Cotard Syndrome. The delusion of negation. Patients believe they're dead, decaying, or don't exist. Some think their organs have stopped. Others insist they have no blood, no brain, no internal function. A few become convinced they're immortal because you can't kill what's already dead. It's not sadness. It's not metaphor. It's unshakable conviction that they've crossed a line between living and not living, and they're trapped on the wrong side. The syndrome often pairs with severe depression, but it's not the same as feeling hopeless. It's ontological. A rupture in the sense of being alive. Patients stop eating because why would a corpse need food? They avoid mirrors because seeing their reflection confirms they're not real. Some request to be taken to a morgue because that's where they belong. The delusion follows damage. Brain injuries, strokes, neurological diseases, psychiatric breaks. Something severs the connection between sensory input and the emotional confirmation that you exist. You see your hand move, but it doesn't feel like your hand. You hear your voice, but it doesn't feel like you're speaking. The feedback loop that says, "I am here, I am alive," breaks. And without it, the mind reaches a conclusion: I must be dead. What's devastating is the isolation. How do you convince someone they're alive when their entire perception tells them otherwise? Doctors insist they're breathing. Family proves they're moving, talking, functioning. But to the person inside Cotard, all of that is just the mechanical persistence of a body that lost its inhabitant. Treatment exists. Antipsychotics, antidepressants, electroconvulsive therapy in severe cases. Many recover. But while trapped inside it, the syndrome is total. It's not a fear of death. It's the certainty that death already happened, and somehow, inexplicably, you're still conscious enough to know it. Cotard Syndrome doesn't make you feel like you're dying. It makes you certain you already did. And the cruelest part is being aware enough to experience the absence of yourself. Munchausen Syndrome. She's been to 12 hospitals this year, each time different symptoms. Chest pain, seizures, infections that won't heal. Doctors run tests, nothing matches. They discharge her. She finds another hospital. The cycle repeats. She's not imagining the symptoms, she's creating them. Swallowing toxins, injecting contaminants, manipulating her body into genuine medical crises because the real goal isn't health. It's attention. Munchausen Syndrome, a psychiatric disorder where someone fabricates or induces illness in themselves to gain sympathy, care, and the role of patient. It's not hypochondria. Hypochondriacs fear they're sick. People with Munchausen know they're not. They make themselves sick deliberately. The behavior is compulsive. They research symptoms, learn medical terminology, forge test results. They know how to mimic conditions convincingly. When doctors can't find anything, they escalate. Self-harm disguised as mysterious illness. Tampering with medical devices. Inducing infections. The goal is always the same: stay in the system. Stay the patient. Stay the center of concern. What drives it is complex. For some, it's the only way they learn to get attention. Childhood illness brought care that nothing else did. The pattern stuck. For others, it's control. Being sick means people have to respond. It creates relationships, even if they're transactional. For some, it's identity. They don't know who they are outside of being unwell. The cost is real. Unnecessary surgeries. Dangerous procedures. Medications that cause actual harm. Some die from the complications they induced. Doctors lose trust. Family members burn out. Relationships collapse when the pattern is discovered. But even when caught, many don't stop. They switch hospitals. Change cities. Start over with new doctors who don't know their history. What makes it tragic is that the suffering is genuine, not the fabricated illness. The psychological need underneath. The loneliness so profound that risking death feels preferable to being invisible. The desperation for care so intense that it can only be accessed through deception. Munchausen Syndrome isn't about wanting to be sick. It's about needing to be seen. And when the only language that gets a response is illness, some people will speak it until it destroys them. Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy. The child has been hospitalized 6 times this year. Mysterious symptoms, sudden fevers, unexplained seizures. Doctors can't find the cause, but the mother is always there. Devoted, devotive, attentive, documenting every detail, advocating relentlessly. And every time the child gets better in the hospital, the symptoms return shortly after going home. Then a nurse notices something. The mother is alone with the child when the episodes happen. Security footage shows her near the IV line before a sudden crisis. Blood work reveals toxins that shouldn't be there. And the truth surfaces: the mother has been poisoning her own child. Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy. A caregiver, almost always a parent, fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care to gain attention, sympathy, and the role of devoted protector. It's not Munchausen turned outward. It's worse. The victim is real, the harm is real, and the perpetrator uses another person's suffering as a tool. The pattern is insidious. The caregiver seems perfect, knowledgeable, caring, tireless. They research medical conditions. They document symptoms meticulously. They build relationships with healthcare providers. They're the last person anyone would suspect. And that's the camouflage. The appearance of devotion hides the abuse. The methods vary. Poisoning food or medication. Smothering to induce breathing problems. Contaminating wounds. Lying about symptoms. tampering with medical equipment, exaggerating or fabricating entire medical histories. The goal isn't to kill. It's to keep the child sick enough to need constant care, which keeps the caregiver central, needed, praised. The harm is catastrophic. Children undergo unnecessary surgeries, endure painful procedures, take medications that damage organs. Some don't survive. Even those who do carry the trauma of being used, of realizing a parent, the person meant to protect them, was the source of their suffering. Detection is difficult. Doctors don't want to believe a parent would hurt their child. The caregiver is convincing. The symptoms are real. It often takes years before the pattern becomes undeniable. Covert surveillance. Separating the child from the caregiver and watching symptoms vanish. Blood tests revealing toxins. Only then does the truth emerge. Munchausen by proxy isn't about the child. It's about the perpetrator's need for validation. And the child becomes the collateral, their body turned into evidence of a devotion that was never real. Stendahl Syndrome. You're standing in the Uffizi Gallery. Botticelli's Birth of Venus. You've seen it in books, on screens. But here, in front of the actual painting, something breaks. The beauty is too much. Your chest tightens. Your vision blurs. The room spins. You can't breathe. The artwork isn't just beautiful. It's unbearable. You have to leave. You collapse outside, heart racing, disoriented, as if the painting reeked inside you and pulled something loose. Stendahl Syndrome. A psychosomatic response to art. Rapid heartbeat. Dizziness, confusion, hallucinations, fainting. Triggered not by fear or trauma, but by beauty. The experience of encountering art so powerful that the mind can't process it and the body shuts down. Named after the French author Stendahl, who described the phenomenon after visiting Florence in 1817. He wrote of feeling overwhelmed, heart-pounding, drained of life, as if the art consumed him. It wasn't appreciation. It was assault by beauty. And he wasn't alone. The syndrome is most documented in Florence. The concentration of masterworks, Michelangelo, Caravaggio, Raphael. Tourists arrive with high expectations. They move through galleries packed with centuries of genius. And for some, the cumulative weight becomes too much. The gap between expectation and encounter, between what they imagined art would feel like and the visceral reality of standing before it, cracks something open. It doesn't happen to everyone. It targets people already primed. High sensitivity, emotional intensity, prolonged anticipation, jet lag and exhaustion don't help. But the core trigger is the same: confrontation with something so far beyond normal experience that ordinary emotional regulation fails. Symptoms escalate fast. First, then disorientation, the sense that the art is not a static object but something alive, something reaching toward you. Some report hallucinations, figures in paintings moving, colors bleeding into 3 dimensions. A few become convinced the artwork holds personal messages meant only for them. Treatment is distance. Get them away from the art, out of the museum, back to mundane reality. Within hours, sometimes minutes, the symptoms fade. The person returns to baseline as if nothing happened, but the experience stays. Some never visit museums again. Others become obsessed, chasing that intensity, trying to recreate the moment when beauty became unbearable. Stendahl Syndrome isn't about the art being objectively great. It's about the collision between human capacity and aesthetic overload. The moment when the mind reeks for transcendence and finds only vertigo. Diogenes Syndrome. The apartment hasn't been cleaned in years. Garbage stacked to the ceiling. Rotting food. Newspapers from decades ago. The smell is unbearable. Neighbors have called the authorities multiple times. And in the middle of it, an elderly man who refuses help. He sees nothing wrong. He doesn't want anyone touching his things. He's not homeless. He's not mentally incapacitated in obvious ways. He just stopped caring about hygiene, health, and every social norm that says living like this is dangerous. Diogenes Syndrome. Severe self-neglect. Compulsive hoarding. Social withdrawal so extreme the person becomes invisible until a crisis forces intervention. It's not laziness. It's not simply depression. It's a complete collapse of self-maintenance paired with an aggressive refusal of help. Named after the ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes, who rejected material wealth and social convention, living in a barrel and mocking societal norms. But the syndrome isn't philosophical rebellion. It's pathological isolation. The person doesn't choose simplicity. They descend into squalor and reject anyone trying to pull them out. The pattern is consistent. Hoarding escalates. Not collecting. Accumulating trash, broken items, things with no value. Hygiene deteriorates. Bathing stops. Clothes aren't washed. Medical issues go untreated. Social contact vanishes. Phone calls ignored. Visitors turned away. The person builds a fortress of neglect and defends it. What drives it varies. Sometimes it follows trauma. A death. A loss so profound the person stops participating in life. Sometimes it's neurological. Dementia. Frontal lobe damage. The part of the brain that regulates self-care and social behavior shuts down. Sometimes it's a lifetime of isolation finally reaching its extreme. The danger is real. Malnutrition. Infections. Fire hazards from hoarded materials. Structural damage to the home. Some die alone in conditions so severe it takes weeks before anyone notices. Even when intervention happens, forced cleanups, hospital stays, many return to the same patterns within months. What makes it tragic is the person often had a functional life before. Career, relationships, independence. Then something breaks. And instead of reaching out, they retreat so far inward that the world outside becomes irrelevant. They don't see themselves as suffering. They see themselves as left alone. And that's exactly what they want, even as it kills them. Alien hand syndrome. Your hand reaches out and grabs something. You didn't tell it to. You watch it move, fingers closing around an object, lifting it, and you have no idea why. You try to stop it. Your other hand has to physically pull it back. It's your hand, a take to your body, controlled by your brain, except it's not. It's acting independently, and the disconnect is terrifying. Alien hand syndrome. One hand operates outside conscious control. It doesn't just twitch. It performs complex, purposeful actions. Unbuttoning clothes you just buttoned. Throwing things you just picked up. Reaching for objects you don't want. Sometimes it fights the other hand. You're trying to open a door. The alien hand slams it shut. The syndrome emerges after brain damage. Strokes. Tumors. Surgery that severs the corpus callosum, the bridge connecting the brain's two hemispheres. When that connection breaks, each side can act independently. The hand controlled by the disconnected hemisphere still receives motor signals. But those signals don't match conscious intent. The result is a limb that belongs to you but doesn't obey you. Patients describe it as betrayal. The hand feels foreign. Some give it a name. Talk to it. Plead with it. Others restrain it, tucking it into a pocket or sitting on it to keep it still. Because when it moves, it's not random. It's deliberate. It reeks for things. It grabs people. It disrupts tasks. And there's no predicting when it will act. What's disturbing is the hand isn't malfunctioning. It's functioning perfectly. It's just operating on instructions the conscious mind didn't issue. The brain sends the signal. The hand obeys. But the person experiencing it has no awareness of giving that command. So the action feels like it's coming from somewhere else. An intruder inside their own body. Some cases improve over time. The brain adapts, learns to suppress the rogue signals. Others persist indefinitely. The person lives with a limb they can't trust. Every movement monitored. Every action second-guessed. their own hand-turned adversary. Alien hand syndrome doesn't take away motor control. It fractures the connection between intention and action, leaving someone to navigate a body that's no longer entirely theirs. Exploding head syndrome. You're drifting off, that space between awake and asleep. And then it happens. A sound so loud it feels like your skull just detonated. A gunshot. A bomb. A cymbal crashing inside your brain. You jolt awake, heart pounding, certain something catastrophic just occurred. But the room is silent. Nothing moved. Nothing exploded. It was all in your head. Exploding head syndrome. A sensory phenomenon where people hear deafening, non-existent sounds as they fall asleep or wake up. It's not a dream. It's not a hallucination in the traditional sense. It's the brain misfiring during the transition between wakefulness and sleep, creating the perception of noise that never happened. The sounds vary. Explosions, gunfire, slamming doors, electrical buzzing, cymbals. Some describe it as a flash of light accompanying the noise. Others feel a jolt, as if struck by lightning. But there's no pain. No physical damage. Just an overwhelming sensory intrusion that feels utterly real in the moment. It happens during sleep transitions. The brain is shutting down systems. Neurons that fire to keep you alert start powering off. But instead of a smooth shutdown, some misfire. The auditory neurons fire all at once. The brain interprets the burst of activity as sound. And because it's happening at high intensity, the sound feels catastrophic. Most people experience it rarely. A few times in a lifetime. Others deal with it nightly. The unpredictability is part of what makes it unsettling. You can't prepare. You're falling asleep, vulnerable, and suddenly your brain is screaming at you that something exploded. There's no physical danger. No lasting effects. The panic comes from not knowing what's happening. People fear brain tumors, aneurysms, seizures. They go to doctors convinced something is catastrophically wrong. And the diagnosis is your brain glitched during a shutdown sequence. It's harmless. Treatment is usually just reassurance. Knowing it's not dangerous reduces the fear. Reducing stress and improving sleep hygiene can lower frequency. But for some, it persists. A harmless neurological quirk that turns the process of falling asleep into a nightly startle. Exploding head syndrome doesn't harm you. It just convinces you in that disorienting moment between consciousness and sleep that something inside your head just shattered. Restless leg syndrome. You're lying in bed, exhausted, ready to sleep. But your legs won't let you. There's a crawling sensation. Deep inside the muscle. Itching, pulling, a ching. Not quite pain, but unbearable discomfort. The only thing that helps is moving. So you shift, you stretch, you get up and walk. The relief is immediate, but the moment you lie back down, it returns. Stronger, more insistent. Sleep becomes impossible. All you can do is move. Restless leg syndrome. An overwhelming urge to move the legs, usually accompanied by uncomfortable sensations. It's not cramps, not soreness. It's an internal restlessness that doesn't resolve until the legs are in motion. And it gets worse at rest, which means it destroys sleep. The sensations are hard to describe. Patients use words like crawling, tingle electric, pulling, throbbing. Always deep inside the leg, not on the surface, not in the joints, in the tissue itself. And nothing external helps. Massage doesn't fix it. Heat or cold don't touch it. The only relief is movement. It worsens at night. During the day, walking and activity keep it suppressed. But the moment someone sits still or lies down, the discomfort surges. Evenings become torture. Bedtime becomes a battle. The person is exhausted but can't stay still long enough to fall asleep. When they finally do, the legs often jerk involuntarily, waking them repeatedly. The fatigue compounds. The cause isn't fully understood. It's linked to dopamine dysfunction, iron deficiency, Genetics. Pregnancy. Certain medications. Sometimes it appears without clear trigger. It's more common than people realize, but many suffer silently because describing it sounds absurd. My legs feel restless doesn't convey the relentless, sanity-eroding discomfort. Treatments exist. Dopamine agonists. Iron supplements if deficiency is found. Lifestyle changes. Avoiding caffeine and alcohol. Moderate exercise. For some, these interventions work. For others, the syndrome persists, varying in intensity but never fully disappearing. What makes it insidious is how it steals rest. Sleep deprivation builds. Cognitive function declines. Mood deteriorates. Relationships strain when a partner is kept awake by constant movement. And the person with RLS is trapped in a body that won't allow stillness. Restless legs syndrome isn't dramatic. It's grinding, an internal compulsion that makes the most basic human need, rest, feel impossible to achieve. Tourette Syndrome. He's in a meeting, professional, focused. Then, without warning, his shoulder jerks. His head snaps to the side. A sound escapes. Not a cough, not a word. A tick. He didn't choose it. Couldn't stop it. And now everyone's staring. Some think it's nervousness. Others assume it's deliberate. But it's neither. It's Tourette. And it doesn't care about timing, context, or consequences. Tourette Syndrome. A neurological disorder characterized by repetitive, involuntary movements and vocalizations called tics. Motor tics: blinking, head jerking, shoulder shrugging, facial grimacing. Vocal tics: throat clearing, grunting, repeating words, and in rare cases, shouting inappropriate language. The person doesn't want to do it. They often feel it coming, amounting tension, but suppressing it only delays and intensifies the release. It usually starts in childhood. Simple tics first. Eye blinking. Nose twitching. Then they evolve. Become more complex. Multiple tics layered together. The severity fluctuates. Stress makes it worse. Anxiety amplifies it. Moments of focus can temporarily suppress tics, but the effort is exhausting and the tics return with greater intensity afterward. The stereotype is shouting profanities. That's coprolalia, and it affects less than 10% of people with Tourette. Most tics are far more mundane. Repetitive throat clearing, shoulder shrugs, head turns. But even those create problems. Job interviews, first dates, public speaking, situations where appearing calm and controlled matters and the body refuses to cooperate. What people don't see is the premonitory urge. The sensation before a tic, like an itch that builds until it's unbearable. You can hold it for a moment, but eventually you have to scratch. Suppressing tics feels like holding your breath. Possible briefly, unsustainable long-term. And when you finally release, the relief is immediate but temporary. Socially, it's isolating. People assume the tics are intentional, attention-seeking, disrespectful, especially vocal tics in quiet spaces, libraries, theaters, classrooms. The judgment is constant. Strangers stare. Some laugh. Others get angry. Explaining doesn't always help. The misunderstanding persists. Treatment exists. Behavioral therapy to manage tics. Medications that reduce severity. But there's no cure. For many, it's a lifelong condition that improves in adulthood, but never fully disappears. The person learns to navigate a world that demands stillness and silence with a brain that won't allow either. Tourette syndrome doesn't define the person, but it forces them to live visibly, involuntarily, in a body that broadcasts what it should conceal. Asperger Syndrome. Everyone's laughing. You don't know why. Someone said something. The group reacted. You missed the cue. You ask what was funny. They say, never mind, or try to explain, and the explanation makes no sense. You weren't being rude. You weren't ignoring them. You just didn't catch whatever signal everyone else received. And this happens constantly. Conversations feel like a language you're only half fluent in, where everyone else knows the grammar and you're guessing. Asperger Syndrome. Part of the autism spectrum, characterized by difficulties in social interaction, communication nuances, and flexible thinking, but without the language delays or cognitive impairments seen in classic autism. Intelligence is often average or above, but social fluency is absent. The deficits are specific: reading facial expressions, interpreting tone, understanding sarcasm, irony, implied meaning. Small talk feels pointless. Eye contact is uncomfortable. Knowing when to speak, when to stop, when someone wants you to leave. All the unspoken rules that neurotypical people absorb automatically remain opaque. What compensates is often intense focus. Asperger individuals develop deep, consuming interests. Trains, astronomy, programming, history. Whatever the topic, they pursue it with single-minded dedication. Conversations become monologues. They're not trying to dominate. They're sharing what excites them. But the reciprocal flow of dialogue, the give and take, the reading of when someone is interested versus politely tolerating, doesn't register. Socially, it's exhausting. Every interaction requires conscious effort. Neurotypical people navigate conversations intuitively. Asperger individuals analyze. They learn scripts, memorize phrases, study social rules like a foreign language. And even then, unexpected variables, new contexts, subtle shifts in tone throw everything off. Friendships are difficult, not because of disinterest, because the mechanics are confusing. When do you reach out? How often is too often? What topics are appropriate? What's oversharing? Romantic relationships are even harder. Flirting is opaque. Emotional reciprocity requires guesswork. Misunderstandings accumulate. The internal experience is often loneliness. Not from lack of desire for connection, from the constant sense of being on the outside, watching a social world that operates on frequencies they can't hear, wanting to participate but not knowing how, trying, failing, and being labeled awkward, cold, weird. Asperger Syndrome doesn't erase intelligence or empathy. It disrupts the transmission. The person cares deeply, thinks intensely, but the interface between their internal world and social reality is fractured, leaving them perpetually translating a language everyone else speaks natively. Down syndrome. The ultrasound shows what the doctor already suspected: extra genetic material. Chromosome 21 appears 3 times instead of 2. Down syndrome. The diagnosis lands before the baby is even born. And with it comes a flood of information: developmental delays, intellectual disability, health complications, a different trajectory than the one imagined. Down syndrome. A genetic condition caused by the presence of an extra copy of chromosome 21. It's not rare. Roughly 1 in 700 births. It affects cognitive development, physical growth, and increases the risk for certain medical issues: heart defects, digestive problems, hearing loss, thyroid conditions, but the severity varies widely. Some individuals live independently. Others require lifelong support. The physical markers are recognizable: almond-shaped eyes, flattened facial profile, a single crease across the palm, shorter stature, lower muscle tone. These features don't define the person, but they make the condition visible. And visibility brings assumptions. People see the syndrome before they see the individual. Cognitively, development happens, just slower. Language takes longer to acquire. Abstract thinking remains challenging. Learning disabilities are common. But intelligence isn't absent. Many people with Down syndrome read, write, work, form relationships, and live meaningful lives. The limitation is real. So is the capacity. What's changed is life expectancy. Decades ago, most didn't survive past childhood. Medical advances shifted that. Better cardiac care, treatment for infections. Today, many live into their 60s. They graduate. They hold jobs. Some marry. The condition doesn't disappear, but the possibilities expanded. Socially, the challenge is perception. The world still treats Down syndrome as tragedy. Parents receive condolences instead of congratulations. Strangers stare. Opportunities narrow. Schools segregate. Employers hesitate. The person with Down syndrome navigates a world designed around assumptions of what they can't do rather than what they can. And inside all of that is a person, with preferences, frustrations, humor, desires. The syndrome shapes their experience, but it doesn't erase individuality. They're not defined by an extra chromosome. They're defined by how the world responds to it. Asherman Syndrome. Her period stopped. Not pregnancy, not menopause, just gone. She waits. Nothing. Months pass. She sees a doctor. Tests are run, and the answer comes back scarring. Thick bands of scar tissue inside the uterus. The walls have fused in places. The lining can't shed. Her body can't menstruate. And if she wants to get pregnant, the scarring might make that impossible too. Asherman Syndrome. Intrauterine adhesions. Scar tissue that forms inside the uterus, usually after surgery. A dilation and curettage procedure often performed after miscarriage or childbirth to remove retained tissue. The scraping damages the uterine lining. Instead of healing cleanly, it scars. The scar tissue glues parts of the uterus together. The space collapses. The symptoms are absence. No periods. Or very light, irregular bleeding. Pelvic pain that comes in cycles because the body is trying to menstruate, but the tissue has nowhere to go. Fertility problems. Recurrent miscarriages. The uterus can't support a pregnancy when the lining is compromised. Diagnosis requires imaging. Ultrasound sometimes shows it. Hysteroscopy, a camera inserted into the uterus, confirms it. The doctor sees the adhesions directly. Bands of tissue where there should be open space. Walls stuck together. The severity ranges from mild, a few strands, to severe, where the entire cavity is obliterated. Treatment is surgical. Hysteroscopic adhesiolysis. The surgeon cuts away the scar tissue, trying to restore the uterine cavity. But scar tissue tends to return. Multiple surgeries are common. Hormones are used afterward to promote healing and prevent rescarring. Even with treatment, fertility isn't guaranteed. The lining might not regenerate fully. Implantation remains difficult. What makes it devastating is the invisibility. It's not cancer. It's not life-threatening. But it quietly dismantles reproductive capacity. Women are told the procedure that caused it was routine, necessary. No one mentioned scarring as a risk. And now they're left managing a condition most people have never heard of. Asherman Syndrome doesn't announce itself. It silently erases the possibility of menstruation, pregnancy, and the future someone planned, one surgery at a time. Korsakoff Syndrome. You ask him what he did yesterday. He tells you a story. Detailed, specific, convincing. Except none of it happened. You know because you were with him yesterday. He was in bed. Barely moved. But he's not lying. He genuinely believes the story he's telling. His brain filled the gap where memory should be with something that feels real. And he has no idea it's fiction. Korsakoff Syndrome. Severe memory impairment caused by thiamine deficiency, most often from chronic alcoholism. The deficiency damages parts of the brain responsible for forming new memories and retrieving old ones. The person can't encode new information. What happened 5 minutes ago is gone. What happened last year is hazy or absent. But the gaps don't stay empty. The brain confabulates. It generates false memories to fill the blanks, not intentionally. Not to deceive. The person isn't aware the memories are fabricated. They experience them as real. Asked where they were this morning, they'll describe a trip to the store, a conversation with a friend, events that never occurred. The confabulation is seamless, confident, unshackable. Short-term memory is destroyed. You introduce yourself. 5 minutes later, They don't remember meeting you. You explain something. They nod. Moments later, it's gone. Conversations loop. The same questions repeated. The same stories told. They're trapped in a perpetual present with no ability to hold on to what just happened. Long-term memory is patchy. Childhood might be intact. Recent decades are blank. They remember their wedding but not their children's names. They know their hometown but can't recall moving. The timeline fragments. What remains is inconsistent, and what's lost gets replaced by invention. The cause is preventable. Thiamine, vitamin B1, is essential for brain function. Alcoholics often don't eat properly. Malnutrition sets in. Thiamine drops. The brain deteriorates. By the time Korsakoff develops, the damage is often permanent. Supplementing thiamine can stop progression, but rarely reverses what's already lost. What's tragic is watching someone navigate a reality they can't retain. They're articulate, present, engaged. But every interaction is new. Every moment dissolves the instant it passes. They're constantly meeting people for the first time, constantly discovering where they are, constantly constructing a past that never existed. Korsakoff Syndrome doesn't erase the person. It erases their ability to anchor themselves in time, leaving them adrift in a present that won't stick, and a past they've unknowingly invented. Fregoli Syndrome. She's convinced her neighbor is following her. Not just following, disguising himself as different people. The barista at the coffee shop, her neighbor in a wig, the man on the subway. Same person, different clothes. The woman at the grocery store. Same face underneath. She knows everyone is watching. Everyone is him, and no one else can see it. Fregoli Syndrome. A delusional disorder where the person believes different people are actually a single individual in disguise. It's the inverse of Capgras. In Capgras, familiar people feel like imposters. In Fregoli, strangers feel like the same familiar person pretending to be different. The delusion is specific. One person, usually someone the patient knows, is perceived as constantly shape-shifting, changing appearance, switching identities, but always the same underneath. The belief is unshakable. Confronted with evidence, photos, documentation that these are different people, the patient dismisses it. That's what disguises are for. That's how good the deception is. It often pairs with paranoia. Why would someone go to such lengths? They must be plotting, surveillance, stalking, persecution. The shape-shifter isn't just following them. They're orchestrating a conspiracy. Every interaction becomes confirmation. Every stranger a potential sighting. The mechanism is unclear. Fregoli tends to surface alongside schizophrenia, brain injuries, or neurological disorders. One theory ties it to face recognition dysfunction paired with hyperfamiliarity. The brain sees a face and incorrectly tags it as someone known. The logical explanation, disguise. The delusion builds from there. Socially, it's isolating. Reporting that everyone is the same person in disguise gets you labeled as paranoid delusional, dangerous. Trust evaporates. How do you maintain relationships when you believe half the people you meet are actually one person spying on you? Friends become suspects. Family gets accused. The world narrows to a single adversary multiplied across every face. Treatment targets the underlying condition. Antipsychotics. Therapy. But insight is difficult. The delusion feels real. The evidence the patient experiences, seeing the same person everywhere, is overwhelming to them. Convincing them otherwise requires dismantling a perception they trust more than any reassurance. Fregoli Syndrome doesn't just distort identity. It collapses the entire social world into a single, omnipresent threat. Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. Your hand looks enormous. Not figuratively. Literally. It's swollen to twice its size. You try to touch your face and your arm stretches impossibly long. The room tilts. The ceiling is too close. The floor is miles away. You know this isn't real. You know your hand is normal. But your brain is screaming the opposite, and no amount of logic stops the distortion. Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. A neurological condition where perception of size, distance, and proportion warps. Objects look larger or smaller than they are. Body parts feel detached or grotesquely altered. Time stretches or compresses. The person knows it's not real, but the sensory input is undeniable. Named after Lewis Carroll's story, where Alice's size shifts unpredictably. Carroll himself likely experienced the syndrome, possibly triggered by migraines. That's the most common cause. Migraines disrupt visual processing. The brain misinterprets spatial information. What you see doesn't match what is. The distortions vary. Macropsia, everything looks tiny. Macropsia, everything looks giant. Teleopsia, objects seem farther away than they are. Pelopsia, objects seem closer. Depersonalization, your own body feels alien, disconnected, not yours. The experience is disorienting. You reach for a cup. Your hand looks like it belongs to someone else. The cup seems to recede as you approach. It's not constant. Episodes last minutes to hours. Triggers include migraines, infections, drugs, epilepsy, brain lesions. Children experience it more often than adults, and most outgrow it. During an episode, the person remains lucid. They know the distortions aren't real, but that knowledge doesn't make them stop. There's no specific treatment. Managing the underlying cause, migraines or infections, reduces frequency. During an episode, the person has to wait it out. Reassurance helps. Knowing it's temporary. Knowing it's not psychosis. But in the moment, the disconnect between what they see and what they know is profoundly unsettling. Alice in Wonderland Syndrome doesn't damage perception permanently. It hijacks it temporarily, turning the familiar world into a funhouse mirror where nothing holds the shape it should. Broken Heart Syndrome. Her husband died suddenly. The grief was instant and crushing. 2 days later, she's in the emergency room. Chest pain. Shortness of breath. The symptoms look like a heart attack. The EKG is abnormal. Blood tests show cardiac markers. The doctors prepare for intervention. But when they image her heart, they find something different. The arteries are clear, no blockage. Instead, part of her heart has stopped pumping. It's ballooned, stunned, not from disease, from grief. Broken Heart Syndrome. Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. A sudden, temporary weakening of the heart muscle triggered by extreme emotional or physical stress. The left ventricle changes shape, bulging at the bottom, narrowing at the top. It mimics a heart attack. Same symptoms, same initial test results. But the cause is entirely different. It's triggered by shock. A death. A breakup. A devastating diagnosis. A physical trauma. Car accident. Surgery. Even intense joy can trigger it. Winning the lottery. A surprise reunion. The emotional surge, positive or negative, floods the body with stress hormones. Adrenaline overwhelms the heart. The muscle temporarily fails. Most patients are postmenopausal women. Why remains unclear. Estrogen might protect the heart from stress hormone surges. When estrogen drops, that protection fades. Men can develop it, but it's far less common. The vulnerability is biological, but the trigger is emotional. The recovery is usually complete. Unlike a true heart attack, broken heart syndrome doesn't cause permanent damage. The heart muscle recovers within weeks. Function returns to normal. But during the acute phase, it's dangerous. Heart failure. Arrhythmias. Some patients don't survive. The line between temporary dysfunction and fatal complication is thin. What's striking is the literalness. Broken heart isn't metaphor. It's physiology. Extreme emotion doesn't just hurt emotionally. It disrupts the heart's ability to pump blood. The grief, the shock, the overwhelming stress becomes a cardiac event. Treatment is supportive. Medications to manage blood pressure and heart function while the muscle recovers. Rest. Time. And addressing the emotional trigger, though that's rarely simple. You can't prescribe away grief. Broken heart syndrome proves the connection between emotion and the body isn't abstract. When the mind breaks under stress, the heart can break with it. Temporarily. Reversibly. But undeniably real. Battered woman syndrome. He hits her. Not for the first time. She thinks about leaving. She's thought about it before. But where would she go? He controls the money. He's isolated her from friends. Her family stopped calling. He's told her no one else would want her. That she's lucky he puts up with her. And when he apologizes after, when he cries and promises it won't happen again, she believes him. Or she needs to believe him. Because leaving feels more dangerous than staying. Battered woman syndrome. A psychological response to sustained domestic abuse. It's not a formal diagnosis, but it describes a pattern. Learned helplessness. The belief that escape is impossible. That resistance will only make things worse. The woman isn't weak. She's adapted to survive an environment where every attempt to leave has been met with escalation, manipulation, or violence. The cycle is predictable. Tension builds. Small infractions. Criticism. Controlling behavior. Then the explosion. Physical violence. Emotional devastation. Afterward comes the calm. Apologies. Gifts. Promises to change. She sees the person she fell in love with. She thinks maybe this time will be different. And then the tension starts building again. Over time, the psychological damage compounds. She internalizes the blame. She must have provoked it. If she were better, quieter, more careful, he wouldn't get angry. Her self-worth erodes. The outside world becomes hostile because he's convinced her it is. Friends don't understand. Family judges. The only person who knows her, however twisted that knowledge is him. Leaving becomes unthinkable. Not because she doesn't want to. Because the barriers are insurmountable. Financial dependence. Fear of retaliation. Threats against her children. The belief, reinforced over years, that she can't function alone. Every time she's tried to assert independence, he's crushed it. Eventually, she stops trying. What outsiders see as an obvious choice, leave feels impossible from the inside. She's not staying because she likes the abuse. She's staying because the abuse has conditioned her to believe there's no alternative. The prison isn't just physical. It's psychological. And the warden is the person who claims to love her. Battered woman syndrome isn't about excusing staying. It's about understanding why the mind, under relentless assault, stops believing escape is real. Empty nest syndrome. The house is quiet. Too quiet. No one's coming home from school. No one needs dinner made. The laundry is lighter. The schedule is empty. For 2 decades, life revolved around raising children. And now, they're gone. Off to college. Starting careers. Living their own lives. Which is exactly what was supposed to happen. But the hole they left is massive. And the person staring into it doesn't know who they are anymore without someone to take care of. Empty nest syndrome. The grief and identity crisis parents experience when children leave home. It's not a clinical disorder, but the emotional impact is real. Loss. Purposelessness. The sudden absence of a role that defined daily existence for years. For some, it's mild. A bittersweet transition. Pride mixed with wistfulness. For others, it's devastating. Depression. Anxiety. A feeling that the most important chapter of life just ended, and nothing ahead feels as meaningful. Especially for parents whose identity became inseparable from caregiving. Who sacrificed careers. Who built their social lives around their children's activities. The child leaves. The structure collapses. Marriages strain. If the relationship was held together primarily by shared parenting, the loss of that glue exposes what's underneath. Couples who stop talking about anything except their kids suddenly have nothing to say. Some rediscover each other. Others realize the connection dissolved years ago. Women experience it more intensely, partly because societal expectations tie maternal identity so tightly to active motherhood. Men feel it too, but often differently. The loss of a role at home sometimes amplifies focus on work. Or it triggers a separate crisis when retirement looms and both pillars of identity, parent and professional, are disappearing. What makes it harder is the silence around it. Complaining that your children succeeded, became independent, and moved forward feels ungrateful. So parents don't talk about it. They perform fine. Proud. Happy for their kids. And privately they're unmoored. The structure that gave life meaning for decades vanished overnight, and they're supposed to just adjust. Adaptation happens. New routines form. Hobbies. Friendships. Rekindled partnerships. But the transition is rough. And for some the question lingers, if I'm not taking care of someone, who am I? Empty nest syndrome doesn't mean parents don't want their children to grow up. It means the identity built around raising them doesn't disappear as easily as the children do. Burnout Syndrome. You used to care. The work mattered. You believed in what you were doing. Now, logging in feels like dragging yourself through concrete. Emails pile up. You stare at them. Nothing happens. Meetings blur together. You nod. You agree. You contribute nothing. By the end of the day, you're exhausted despite doing almost nothing. And the idea of tomorrow of doing this again is unbearable. Burnout Syndrome. Chronic workplace stress that hasn't been managed. It's more than being tired. It's emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, a collapsing sense of accomplishment. The work that once gave you purpose now feels meaningless, and you feel powerless to change it. It builds slowly. At first, you're just busy. Then you're overwhelmed. Then you stop sleeping well. Then you stop caring. The passion that carried you through long hours evaporates. Cynicism replaces it. Coworkers become obstacles. Tasks become pointless. You go through the motions, but the internal drive is gone. 3 components define it. Exhaustion, emotional and physical depletion. Nothing recharges you. A weekend off doesn't help. A vacation makes returning worse. Cynicism, detachment from the work and the people. You stop empathizing. Problems that would have motivated you to solve now get shrugged off. Inefficacy, the belief that nothing you do matters. Wins don't register. Failures confirm what you already think you're not capable. The system is broken, or both. Certain jobs accelerate it. Healthcare, teaching, social work. High responsibility, low control, relentless demand. But burnout isn't exclusive to helping professions. Any job with chronic stress, inadequate support, and mismatched values can trigger it. Long hours don't cause burnout. Feeling like those hours achieve nothing does. The danger is how it spreads. Burnout at work bleeds into personal life. Relationships suffer. Health declines. Hobbies feel pointless. The exhaustion becomes total. And because it's tied to work, people think quitting is the only answer. Some do. It helps. Sometimes. But burnout isn't just about the job. It's about the mismatch between what the person needs and what the environment demands. Recovery requires more than rest. It requires change, boundaries, realistic expectations, support. Often it requires leaving. But even then, the damage lingers. The belief that effort is futile doesn't vanish the moment you switch employers. Burnout syndrome doesn't happen because you're weak. It happens because the system demanded more than you could sustainably give, and you kept giving until there was nothing left. Chronic fatigue syndrome. You wake up exhausted. Not tired. Exhausted. Like you've been awake for days. You sleep 10 hours. It doesn't help. You rest all day. Still exhausted. Showering is hard. Getting dressed takes all your energy. And it's not just physical. Your mind is foggy. Words don't come. Thoughts scatter. This isn't laziness. You want to function. You can't. And it's been like this for months. Chronic fatigue syndrome. Profound, persistent exhaustion that doesn't improve with rest and worsens with physical or mental activity. It's not being tired from a long week. It's debilitating fatigue that has no clear cause and doesn't respond to sleep. Diagnosis is difficult. There's no test for it. No biomarker. Doctors rule out other conditions. Thyroid issues, anemia, depression, sleep disorders. When everything comes back normal but the exhaustion persists, CFS becomes the explanation, which makes many patients feel dismissed. Like doctors are saying it's all in their head. The symptoms extend beyond fatigue. Post-exertional malaise activity that would normally be fine, a short walk, a conversation, leaves you bedridden for days. Cognitive dysfunction, brain fog so thick you can't follow a TV show. Sleep disturbances, unrefreshing sleep, insomnia, or both. Muscle pain. Headaches. Dizziness when standing. The body is malfunctioning across multiple systems, and no one knows why. Theories exist. Viral infections as triggers. Immune system dysfunction. Mitochondrial problems. But nothing definitive. The lack of a clear cause fuels skepticism. People think it's psychological. Malingering. Hypochondria. Patients are told to exercise more. Push through. Which makes it worse. Exertion doesn't build stamina in CFS. It crashes the system. Socially, it's isolating. You can't work. You cancel plans constantly. Friends stop inviting you. Family gets frustrated. You look fine. The invisibility of the illness makes others doubt it's real. And because there's no cure, just symptom management, the prognosis is uncertain. Some improve, some don't. Some cycle between better and worse indefinitely. What makes it cruel is the total disruption. People who were active, productive, independent become housebound, unable to perform basic tasks. And the medical system often can't help because it doesn't fully understand what's wrong. Chronic fatigue syndrome doesn't just make you tired. It dismantles your ability to live, one exhausted day at a time, while the world insists you should just rest more. Irritable bowel syndrome. Your stomach cramps. Urgent. Urgent. You need a bathroom now. You find one. Relief. But an hour later it happens again. And again. The unpredictability is worse than the pain. You can't plan. Can't commit to anything that doesn't guarantee immediate bathroom access. Meetings. Dates. Travel. All become logistical nightmares. And when the flare-up finally ends, you're left wondering what triggered it. Stress. Food. Nothing at all. Irritable bowel syndrome, a chronic disorder affecting the large intestine. Cramping, bloating, gas, diarrhea or constipation or both, alternating unpredictably. The digestive system malfunctions without clear structural cause. Colonoscopies show nothing. Blood work is normal, but the symptoms are relentless. The diagnosis is exclusionary. Doctors test for inflammatory bowel disease. Celiac. Infections. When everything's ruled out and the symptoms persist, IBS is what's left. It's frustrating. Patients want a cause, a target, something fixable. Instead, they get a label for a set of symptoms no one fully understands. Triggers vary. Certain foods. Dairy, gluten. High-fat meals. But the list is different for everyone. Stress is a major factor. Anxiety triggers flare-ups, and flare-ups cause anxiety. The gut and the brain are linked. When stress rises, the intestines react. The unpredictability creates more stress. The cycle reinforces itself. Socially, it's humiliating. Explaining why you can't eat at a restaurant without sounding high maintenance. Excusing yourself from meetings repeatedly. The fear of an episode in public makes people avoid situations entirely. Dating is difficult. Travel is stressful. Spontaneity disappears because every decision requires contingency planning around bathroom access. Treatment is management, not cure. Dietary changes. Fiber supplements, medications for diarrhea or constipation, stress reduction, therapy, probiotics. What works for one person fails for another. The variability is maddening, and because the condition is invisible, people assume it's exaggerated. That it's just a sensitive stomach. That you should toughen up. But IBS isn't about being delicate. It's the digestive system in chronic rebellion, disrupting daily life with symptoms that medicine can ease but not eliminate. And the psychological toll, constant vigilance, fear of flare-ups, social withdrawal, becomes part of the condition itself. Irritable bowel syndrome doesn't kill you. It just makes living normally feel impossible. Sick building syndrome. Everyone on your floor has headaches, not one or two people. Most of the office. Complaints of dizziness, fatigue, dry throat, nausea. People call in sick more often. Productivity tanks. Someone mentions the ventilation. Someone else blames the new carpet. But when people leave the building, the symptoms improve. Come back the next day and they return. Sick building syndrome. A situation where building occupants experience health issues that seem linked to time spent inside, but no specific illness or cause is identified. The symptoms are real. The source remains elusive. It's not one thing. It's usually a combination. Poor ventilation, contaminants from construction materials, mold, chemical off-gassing from furniture or cleaning products, dust, inadequate air circulation. The building traps pollutants. The occupants breathe them in. Low-level exposure builds over hours. The symptoms cluster. Headache, eye irritation, respiratory complaints, skin rashes, difficulty concentrating, fatigue that resolves after leaving the building. The pattern is the key. If symptoms appear at work and vanish at home, the building becomes the suspect. Proving it is hard. Air quality tests are expensive. Results are often inconclusive. No single measurement screams danger. Instead, there are low levels of multiple irritants. Individually, none exceed safety thresholds. Collectively, they create discomfort. Building managers resist acknowledging the problem because fixing it is costly. Occupants feel dismissed. They're not imagining it. But without hard evidence, the complaints stall. Certain buildings are worse. Older structures with outdated HVAC systems. New buildings with sealed windows and insufficient fresh air intake. Spaces recently renovated without proper ventilation during construction. The problem surfaces when corners are cut. When energy efficiency prioritizes ceiling over airflow. When maintenance budgets neglect filtration. The psychological component complicates it. Once people believe the building is making them sick, symptoms can amplify through suggestion. Someone mentions mold. Now everyone smells it. That doesn't mean the problem isn't real, but it makes separating physical cause from psychological amplification difficult. Resolution requires investigation and intervention, improving ventilation, replacing contaminated materials, cleaning ducts, increasing fresh air exchange. When changes are made, symptoms often decrease, which confirms the building was the problem all along. Sick building syndrome isn't hypochondria. It's the environment quietly poisoning the people inside it, one recycled breath at a time. Havana Syndrome. You're at your desk, late, working. Then you hear it. A piercing sound, high-pitched, directional, like it's aimed at you. Pressure builds inside your skull. Your vision blurs. The room spins. You stumble. Try to leave, the sound follows. Or maybe it's inside your head now. You can't tell. By the time it stops, you're nauseous, disoriented, unable to focus. And the headaches don't go away. Weeks later, you're still struggling to think clearly. Havana Syndrome. A cluster of unexplained symptoms reported by diplomats and intelligence officers, first in Cuba, then spreading to other locations worldwide. Sudden onset. Piercing sounds or pressure sensations. Dizziness. Nausea. Cognitive impairment that persists long after the initial event. Some cases involve hearing loss. Others, brain injuries detectable on scans. The mystery is what causes it. Early theories pointed to sonic weapons, directed energy attacks, microwave radiation. The symptoms aligned with acoustic trauma, but no device was ever found. Investigations pursued everything from mass psychogenic illness to covert attacks by foreign adversaries. Evidence remained inconclusive. What's consistent is the pattern. It happens to people in sensitive positions, intelligence personnel, diplomats, often in hostile or contested regions. The attacks, if they are attacks, seem targeted, deliberate. But proving intentionality requires identifying a mechanism, and that mechanism has never been confirmed. Brain scans of affected individuals showed abnormalities. White matter changes. Structural differences compared to controls. The damage was real, not imagined. Not hysteria. Something harmed these people. But whether it was a weapon, environmental exposure, or an unknown phenomenon remains unresolved. The US government investigated. Agencies disagreed on conclusions. Some reports suggested directed energy. Others dismissed it as stress, anxiety, or coincidental illness. Affected individuals felt abandoned. Their symptoms were undeniable. Their careers derailed. Their health compromised. And the answer they needed, what happened to them, stayed out of reach. Havana Syndrome isn't resolved. It's a medical mystery wrapped in geopolitical tension. Real harm with no confirmed cause. And the people suffering it are left navigating a condition the world still can't explain. Kluver-Bucy Syndrome. He's not violent, not confused. But something is deeply wrong. He puts everything in his mouth. Pens, papers, objects that aren't food. He approaches strangers without hesitation. No sense of personal space. No recognition of social boundaries. His emotions are flat. Fear is gone. Anger is absent. And his sexual behavior is inappropriate, constant, indiscriminate, compulsive. Kluver-Bucy Syndrome, a rare neurological disorder caused by damage to both temporal lobes, particularly the amygdala. The parts of the brain that regulate emotion, fear, and social behavior stop functioning. What remains is a person whose impulses override every learned constraint. The behaviors cluster in predictable ways. Hyperality, compulsive examination of objects with the mouth. Visual agnosia, inability to recognize objects by sight, so everything must be touched or tasted. Hypersexuality, inappropriate, relentless sexual behavior. Placidity, the absence of fear or emotional reactivity. Hypermetamorphosis, obsessive attention to every visual stimulus, unable to filter or prioritize. The damage usually comes from severe brain injury. Herpes encephalitis, stroke, traumatic head trauma. Surgery that removes parts of the temporal lobe. Alzheimer's in late stages. The amygdala, responsible for processing threat and emotional significance, is destroyed or disconnected. Without it, the person can't assess danger, recognize social cues, or regulate desire. What's striking is the person's awareness. They're not delusional, not psychotic. They know what they're doing. But the internal brake that stops inappropriate behavior is gone. The compulsion to act overpowers the knowledge that it's wrong. They pick up random objects and put them in their mouth. They know it's strange. They can't stop. Socially, it's catastrophic. Hypersexuality alienates everyone. Families can't manage the behavior. Care facilities struggle. Legal issues arise. The person isn't trying to offend. They've lost the circuitry that would make them care. There's no cure. Treatment focuses on managing symptoms. Medications to reduce compulsions. Behavioral interventions. Close supervision. But the underlying damage is permanent. The brain that once regulated impulse, fear, and social appropriateness is gone. What's left operates without those controls. Kluver-Bucy Syndrome doesn't erase the person. It erases the restraints that made them navigable in a social world, leaving behind impulses that no longer answer to consequence or shame. Locked-in syndrome. You're awake, fully conscious. You can think. You can hear everything. The doctors. Your family. They're talking about you like you're not there. You try to speak. Nothing. You try to move your hand. Nothing. Your body doesn't respond. Not your arms. Not your legs. Not your face. You can't even blink. The only thing that works is your eyes. You can move them up and down. And that's it. You're trapped inside a body that won't obey. Locked-in syndrome. Complete paralysis except for vertical eye movement. The person is conscious. Cognitive function is intact. But communication is nearly impossible. The brain sends signals. The body doesn't respond. A functioning mind imprisoned in a non-functioning body. The cause is specific. Damage to the brainstem, usually the pons. A stroke. A traumatic injury. A lesion that severs the pathways carrying motor signals from the brain to the rest of the body. Sensation often remains. The person feels touch, pain, temperature, but they can't react, can't pull away, can't speak. What's preserved is awareness. They hear conversations, understand everything, experience emotions. But from the outside, they look unconscious, comatose. Families are told there's no hope, that the person is gone. Meanwhile, the person is screaming inside, fully present, unable to make anyone hear. Diagnosis requires someone noticing the eye movement, a deliberate blink pattern. Once recognized, communication becomes possible. Alphabet boards. Eye tracking technology. Slow, painstaking, but real. The person can answer yes or no, spell words, express thoughts. Existence shifts from total isolation to limited interaction. Life with locked-in syndrome is endurance. Dependency is complete. Every need requires assistance. Eating, bathing, repositioning to avoid bed sores. The person has no autonomy, no privacy, no ability to do anything themselves, and they're conscious through all of it. Some adapt. With technology, they write books, communicate with family, maintain relationships. Others don't. Depression is common. The gap between the internal life and the external reality is unbearable. They're alive, but living feels like being buried. Locked-in syndrome doesn't steal consciousness. It traps it. A fully aware mind left to experience the world through eyes that can only watch. Learned helplessness syndrome. Dogs in a lab. They're put in cages, given electric shocks. At first, they try to escape, jumping, scrambling, searching for a way out. But there's no escape. The shocks keep coming no matter what they do. Eventually, they stop trying. Even when the cage door opens, they don't leave. They've learned that effort doesn't matter, that nothing they do changes the outcome. So they lie down and endure it. Learned helplessness. A psychological condition where repeated exposure to uncontrollable, negative events teach the person, or animal, that they have no control. Even when opportunities for escape or change appear, they don't take them. Because they've learned that trying is pointless. The concept emerged from experiments, but it translates directly to human experience. Chronic abuse. Persistent poverty. Repeated failure despite effort. When nothing you do improves your situation, the mind eventually stops believing change is possible. Not because you're weak, because the evidence overwhelmingly suggests you're powerless. It shows up in relationships. Someone endures mistreatment for years. Friends ask why they don't leave. They've tried. It didn't work. Promises were broken. Attempts were punished. Eventually, the effort stops. Not because they accept the abuse. Because they've learned that resistance changes nothing. It shows up in poverty. Families apply for assistance. Jump through bureaucratic hoops. Nothing improves. Jobs don't pay enough. Housing is unstable. Education doesn't lead to opportunity. The effort required to keep trying becomes unsustainable when results never follow. so they stop trying. And observers call it laziness, apathy, lack of ambition. It's not. It's learned helplessness. It shows up in depression. Tasks pile up. The person knows they should act. But every prior attempt to manage, to fix things, to get better, failed. The lesson absorbed, effort doesn't help. So even small tasks feel insurmountable because the belief in agency is gone. Breaking learned helplessness requires demonstrating that action produces results. Small wins. Proof that effort matters. But when someone has spent years learning the opposite, convincing them otherwise takes time. And sustained evidence that this time really is different. Learned helplessness isn't giving up. It's the rational conclusion the mind reeks when experience teaks that trying doesn't change anything. Hikikomori Syndrome. He hasn't left his room in months, maybe longer. His parents bring food. Leave it outside the door. He takes it when they're gone. No school, no job, no friends. Just the room, the computer, the same four walls. He's not depressed in the clinical sense. He's not psychotic. He's just withdrawn so completely from society that the outside world stopped being a place he can imagine existing in. Hikikomori. A Japanese term for extreme social withdrawal. The person isolates in their room for months or years, avoiding all social contact. No work, no education, no interaction beyond the absolute minimum. It's not agoraphobia. It's not schizophrenia. It's a refusal to participate in society so total that life collapses into a single room. The phenomenon is most documented in Japan, where cultural and economic pressures create specific conditions. Intense academic competition, rigid social hierarchies, shame around failure. When someone can't meet expectations, dropping out entirely feels safer than facing judgment. The room becomes refuge. The withdrawal becomes identity. But hikikomori isn't exclusive to Japan. It surfaces wherever social pressure, economic instability, and digital alternatives converge. Young men, mostly, who can't find work, can't meet social expectations and retreat into online spaces where participation doesn't require leaving the house. The timeline varies. Some withdraw for months, others for decades. Parents enable it because confrontation risks complete breakdown. Siblings move on with their lives. The person in the room ages in isolation. Physical health deteriorates. Social skills atrophy. The longer it continues, the harder re-entry becomes. What drives it isn't simple. Sometimes it's bullying, trauma, academic failure, social rejection. Sometimes it's the gap between expectations and reality. The job market collapsed. The future promise doesn't exist. Withdrawing feels like the only rational response to a world that offers nothing. Recovery requires intervention, therapy, gradual reintegration, support systems that don't shame. But many families can't afford treatment, or don't recognize the severity until years have passed. By then, the person has spent so long in isolation that the skills needed to re-enter society, conversation resilience, navigating social norms, are gone. Hikikomori Syndrome isn't laziness. It's total social withdrawal as a response to unbearable external pressure. And the room that started as refuge becomes a prison the person can't imagine leaving. Sudden wealth syndrome. The lottery. The inheritance. The startup that sold for millions. Overnight, you have more money than you ever imagined. Financial stress is gone. You can buy anything. Do anything. This is supposed to be the dream. But 6 months later, you're miserable. Friends treat you differently. Some ask for money. Others resent you. Your family is fighting over what you should do with it. You don't trust anyone. You're anxious, paranoid. And despite the wealth, you feel more trapped than you did when you had nothing. Sudden wealth syndrome. The psychological distress that follows acquiring large sums of money quickly. It's not a clinical diagnosis, but the pattern is real. Anxiety, guilt, paranoia, identity crisis. The money doesn't bring happiness. It brings new problems the person isn't equipped to handle. The triggers are obvious. Lottery wins. Inheritance. Selling a business. A sudden promotion with massive compensation. Stock options that explode in value. The amount matters less than the speed. Gradual wealth accumulation allows adaptation. Sudden wealth overwhelms. The first hit is relational. People you trusted start acting different. Friends ask for loans. Family members expect support. Strangers appear with investment opportunities. You can't tell who's genuine and who sees you as a resource. Trust erodes. Relationships that felt stable fracture under the weight of money. The second hit is identity. If you were broke, and now you're wealthy, who are you? The values you built around frugality, hard work, making do, don't apply anymore. You're supposed to feel grateful. Relieved. Instead, you feel unmoored, guilty for having what others don't. Anxious that you'll lose it. Paralyzed by decisions you're not trained to make. The third hit is isolation. You can't talk about the stress because complaining about money when you have it sounds absurd. So you suffer privately, cut off from people who can't relate. Surrounded by advisors you're not sure you can trust. The wealth becomes a barrier between you and everyone else. Some people spiral, spending recklessly to feel in control. Making terrible investments because they don't know how to say no. Losing it all within years because the psychological toll made rational management impossible. Others withdraw entirely, hoarding the money, living in fear of losing it, never enjoying it. Sudden wealth syndrome proves money doesn't solve psychological needs. It just exchanges one set of problems for another. And if you're not prepared, the new problems can destroy you faster than the old ones ever did. White coat syndrome. Your blood pressure is fine at home. You check it. Normal. Consistent. But the moment you walk into a doctor's office, something shifts. The nurse wraps the cuff around your arm. You feel your heart rate climbing. The reading comes back high. Too high. The doctor looks concerned. Asks if you're stressed. You weren't. Until now. White coat syndrome. Also called white coat hypertension. Blood pressure spikes in medical settings but remains normal everywhere else. It's not faking. It's not exaggeration. The body genuinely reacts to the clinical environment. The presence of medical professionals. The equipment. The anticipation of being evaluated. All of it triggers a stress response that elevates blood pressure temporarily. The mechanism is straightforward. Medical settings induce anxiety. Even when there's no rational threat, the association between doctors and bad news runs deep. Tests, diagnoses, procedures, the uncertainty of what might be found. That background anxiety activates the sympathetic nervous system. Heart rate increases. Blood vessels constrict. Blood pressure rises. The challenge is distinguishing it from actual hypertension. If every medical reading is high, doctors have to decide it. Is this real high blood pressure, or is it just the setting? Home monitoring helps. Ambulatory blood pressure monitoring over 24 hours captures readings in normal environments. If those are fine, white coat syndrome is likely. If they're elevated too, it's hypertension that needs treatment. But white coat syndrome isn't harmless. It indicates the body's stress response is easily triggered. And some studies suggest people with white coat hypertension have higher risk of developing sustained high blood pressure later. The spikes might be temporary now. They might not stay that way. Socially, it's frustrating. The person knows they're healthy. The doctor sees numbers that say otherwise. Convincing medical professionals that the environment is the problem requires evidence. And gathering that evidence means more monitoring, more appointments, more exposure to the setting that causes the spike in the first place. White coat syndrome doesn't mean you're imagining illness. It means your body has learned to fear the place designed to keep you healthy. Resignation Syndrome. The children stopped moving. Not all at once. First, they stopped speaking, then eating, then responding to anything. Now they lie in bed, eyes closed, completely unresponsive. Not comatose, not brain damaged. Conscious but withdrawn so totally that they've shut down. Feeding tubes keep them alive. But inside, they've resigned from existence. Resignation Syndrome. A condition observed primarily in refugee children in Sweden. After enduring trauma, displacement, and prolonged asylum uncertainty, they enter a state of complete psychological withdrawal. They stop talking, stop eating, stop moving. They appear unconscious, but tests show normal brain activity. They've essentially given up on living while still being alive. The pattern is specific. It affects children, mostly between ages 8 and 15, almost exclusively from refugee families facing deportation. The trauma isn't just what they fled. It's the limbo. Applications denied. Appeals pending. Years of uncertainty about whether they'll be sent back to the place that harmed them. The stress compounds until the child's system shuts down entirely. The withdrawal is gradual. First, depression, withdrawal from activities, loss of appetite. Then selective mutism. They stop speaking, even to family. Then they stop moving. Eventually they're bedridden, eyes closed. Unresponsive to stimuli, they require total care. Feeding tubes. Repositioning to prevent bed sores. And they can remain in this state for months, sometimes years. What's extraordinary is the recovery pattern. When families receive asylum, permission to stay, the children wake up. Not immediately, but within weeks or months they start responding, opening their eyes, moving, speaking, eating, as if the threat being removed allows them to return. Medical explanations remain debated. Some frame it as extreme dissociation, a psychological defense so extreme the person detakes from reality entirely. Others suggest a trauma response akin to tonic immobility, the freeze response animals exhibit when escape is impossible. The body shuts down to survive unbearable stress. Culturally, it's almost exclusive to Sweden, which raises questions. Is it cultural? A learned response observed in other children and replicated? Or does Sweden's particular asylum process create conditions that trigger it? No one knows for certain. What's clear is the children aren't faking. Brain activity shows they're aware. They're not comatose. They've withdrawn so deeply that engaging with the world feels impossible. And the only thing that brings them back is the removal of the existential threat. Resignation syndrome isn't giving up. It's the body and mind shutting down when hope becomes unbearable and waiting feels like dying. Chinese restaurant syndrome. You finish the meal. Frayed rice. Sweet and sour chicken. An hour later your head starts pounding. Your face feels flushed. Your heart races. You're sweating. Nauseous. You think back to the food. MSG. Must be MSG. Everyone knows MSG causes this. You avoid Chinese restaurants after that. The symptoms were real. The cause. Less clear than you think. Chinese restaurant syndrome. A term coined in the 60s after a letter to a medical journal described symptoms following Chinese food. Headache. Sweating. Facial pressure. Rapid heartbeat. The author blamed monosodium glutamate MSG, a flavor enhancer common in Chinese cuisine. The idea spread. MSG became synonymous with adverse reactions, but the science never supported it. Study after study failed to replicate the findings. Double-blind trials where people consumed MSG without knowing showed no consistent reactions. Some reported symptoms after eating MSG. Others reported symptoms after eating a placebo. The pattern wasn't chemical. It was expectation. MSG is glutamate, an amino acid naturally present in tomatoes, cheese, mushrooms, soy sauce. Your body produces it. Your brain uses it. The dose in restaurant food is comparable to what's in a tomato-heavy pasta sauce. If MSG caused the symptoms people report, Italian food would trigger them just as often. It doesn't. So, what's happening? Several possibilities. Placebo effect. If you expect MSG to make you sick, the anticipation creates symptoms. Overeating. Chinese restaurant meals are often large, rich, high in sodium. That alone can cause flushing, headache, nausea. Alcohol. Many people drink while eating out. Alcohol plus a heavy meal explains the symptoms perfectly, but the label's stuck. And it carries a troubling edge. Chinese restaurant syndrome targets a specific cuisine. It others it, makes it seem dangerous, exotic, suspect in ways Western food isn't. Despite containing the same ingredients, the term itself is a problem. It's not a syndrome. It's a cultural anxiety dressed up as a medical condition. The harm is real. Restaurants removed MSG to appease customers. Not because it was dangerous. Because the perception of danger hurt business. And people continue to avoid MSG, believing it causes reactions that controlled studies can't reproduce. Chinese restaurant syndrome isn't about MSG. It's about how expectation, cultural bias, and poor science combine to create a myth that refuses to die despite decades of evidence against it. Foreign accent syndrome. You wake up from surgery, brain surgery. Successful, the tumor's gone. You're recovering. Then you speak. And the voice coming out isn't yours, not the content, the accent. You're American. You've lived in Texas your whole life. But now you sound British. Or vaguely European. You're not faking it. You can't control it. Your own voice has become a stranger's. Foreign accent syndrome. A rare speech disorder where brain injury causes someone to speak with what sounds like a foreign accent. The person isn't adopting it intentionally. They're not bilingual. The injury damages the parts of the brain controlling speech, rhythm, intonation, and articulation. What emerges sounds foreign, but it's actually their native language filtered through neurological malfunction. The triggers are specific. Stroke. Traumatic brain injury. Brain surgery. Anything that affects the left hemisphere, particularly areas controlling speech production. The damage alters how the person forms sounds. Vowels lengthen. Stress patterns shift. Consonants soften or sharpen. The result sounds like an accent, but it's really a cluster of speech errors that happen to mimic foreign speech patterns. The accents aren't consistent. Someone might sound vaguely French to one listener, Scandinavian to another. The perception depends on the listener's exposure to different accents. The speaker isn't producing a real French or Scandinavian accent. They're producing distorted speech that listeners interpret through the lens of accents they've heard before. Socially, it's destabilizing. Your voice is part of your identity. When it changes, people treat you differently. They assume you're pretending, mocking them, putting on airs. Friends don't recognize you on the phone. Strangers ask where you're from, and explaining that a brain injury changed your accent sounds absurd, even when it's true. Psychologically, it's alienating. You hear yourself speak and don't recognize the sound. The disconnect between intention and output is constant. You know what you want to say. You know how it should sound. But what comes out is wrong. And unlike other speech impairments, where the problem is obvious, foreign accent syndrome sounds fluent. People don't realize it's a disorder. They think it's affectation. Recovery is unpredictable. Some cases improve with speech therapy. Others persist indefinitely. The brain might adapt, reroute the damage, or the accent becomes permanent, a lifelong reminder of the injury that changed how the world hears you. Foreign accent syndrome doesn't give you a new language. It takes your voice and makes it unrecognizable, leaving you fluent in words that no longer sound like yours. Phantom vibration syndrome. Your phone buzzes. You feel it. You reach into your pocket. Nothing. No notification. No call. No message. The phone didn't vibrate, but you swear you felt it. This happens constantly, throughout the day. a phantom buzz that isn't real. Your brain convinced your pocket vibrated when it didn't. Phantom Vibration Syndrome. The sensation of your phone vibrating when it hasn't. It's not rare. Studies suggest the majority of phone users experience it. The brain has learned to anticipate the vibration so thoroughly that it generates the sensation even when the stimulus is absent. The mechanism is pattern recognition gone overboard. Your phone vibrates regularly. Calls, texts, notifications. Your brain learns the pattern, associates the pocket with the sensation. Eventually, any similar input, fabric shifting, muscle twitch, random nerve firing, gets interpreted as a phone vibration. The expectation creates the experience. It's classical conditioning. Pavlov's dogs salivated at the bell because the bell predicted food. Your brain generates phantom vibrations because vibrations predict information. Messages, connection, the possibility that someone needs you. The sensation becomes anticipatory. Your nervous system primed to detect it even when it's not there. What makes it notable is how widespread it is. Phantom vibrations weren't a thing before smartphones. The syndrome emerged alongside the technology. It's an artifact of constant connectivity, of checking your phone dozens of times a day, of being trained to respond immediately to every buzz. For most people, it's a minor annoyance, a brief check, confirmation that nothing's there. Move on. But for some, it's a marker of dependency. The brain so tuned to the phone that it can't distinguish real signals from imagined ones. The line between connected and anxious blurs. It's not dangerous. It's not pathological. But it's revealing. A phantom sensation generated by a brain that's learned to expect constant input. And the fact that it's so common suggests we've all been conditioned more thoroughly than we realize. Phantom Vibration Syndrome doesn't mean you're addicted to your phone. But it does mean your brain has written its sensory expectations around a device that didn't exist 20 years ago. Middle Child Syndrome. The oldest gets responsibility, leadership, the role of trailblazer. The youngest gets attention, indulgence. The baby of the family and the middle child, overlooked. Not special enough to be first. Not young enough to be coddled. Just there, navigating a family structure where the roles above and below are clear, and theirs is whatever's left over. Middle Child Syndrome. The idea that children born between the oldest and youngest develop specific personality traits because of their position in the family. Feeling neglected. Seeking attention outside the home. Becoming peacemakers or rebels. Not because of inherent temperament, but because the family dynamic shaped them that way. The theory comes from birth order psychology. The oldest child gets the parents' full attention until a sibling arrives. The youngest is often protected, doted on. The middle child never gets exclusive focus. They arrive when the parents are less anxious than with the first, less indulgent than with the last. They're raised in the middle of established family roles, and the space left for them is ambiguous. What supposedly results middle children become flexible, diplomatic, good at negotiating because they had to mediate between siblings, but also feeling invisible, less valued. They're not the responsible one, not the baby, they're the bridge, the forgotten middle, and that shapes how they see themselves and relate to others. But here's the problem. Birth order effects are inconsistent. Large-scale studies don't reliably support the idea that middle children share specific traits. Family size matters. Family dynamics matter. Culture matters. The age gaps between siblings matter. Two families with middle children might produce entirely different outcomes based on 100 variables unrelated to birth order. What does seem real is the subjective experience. If you're a middle child and you felt overlooked, that feeling is valid. Whether it was caused by birth order or something else, the experience shaped you. But attributing it to middle child syndrome risks oversimplifying. Maybe your parents were overwhelmed. Maybe they favored one child for reasons unrelated to order. Maybe you perceived neglect where none existed because comparison to siblings highlighted differences. Middle child syndrome is less a clinical reality and more a cultural narrative, a way to make sense of family dynamics. And for some it fits. For others, it doesn't. But either way, blaming personality on birth order ignores the far more complex reality of how families actually function. Middle child syndrome isn't about being born in the middle. It's about feeling stuck between roles that were already taken. Superwoman Syndrome. She works full-time, manages the household, raises the kids, volunteers at school, stays fit, maintains friendships, shows up for aging parents, and somewhere in the middle of all that, she's supposed to take care of herself. Except there's no time, no energy. Every role demands excellence, and asking for help feels like admitting failure, so she keeps going, until she can't. Superwoman Syndrome. The pressure to excel in every role simultaneously. Partner, mother, daughter, friend. The expectation, internalized or external, that women should manage it all without complaint, without dropping any thread, without showing the strain. It's not ambition. It's the belief that anything less than perfect performance everywhere is inadequacy. The roots are social. Women were told they could have it all. Career and family. Independence and domestic perfection. But no one mentioned the math didn't work. Full-time job plus full-time parenting plus full-time household management equals more hours than exist in a day. The solution isn't better time management. It's impossible expectations. The toll is cumulative. Chronic stress, sleep deprivation, physical exhaustion that doesn't resolve with rest, emotional depletion that makes every small task feel monumental, resentment that builds when no one notices how much is being carried, and guilt, constant, pervasive guilt, for not doing enough at work, not being present enough at home, not taking care of health, not being available for friends. The scorecard is always in deficit. What makes it vicious is the internalization. Society sets the expectation, but women enforce it on themselves. Delegating feels like failing. Saying no feels selfish. Admitting overwhelm feels weak. So the pressure continues. Tasks pile up. The to-do list never shrinks. And the person carrying it all starts believing she's the problem. Not disciplined enough. Not capable enough. Not strong enough. Burnout is inevitable. Not just professional burnout. Total exhaustion across every domain. When it hits, the collapse is comprehensive. Health breaks down. Relationships fracture. The performance that was unsustainable finally becomes impossible. And the question becomes, was any of it necessary? Or was the real failure believing one person could be everything to everyone without cost? Superwoman Syndrome doesn't celebrate strength. It punishes it. It takes capable people and convinces them that capability means carrying burdens no single person was meant to hold. Sunday Neurosis. The week is done. The weekend arrives. Finally, time to relax. But the moment you stop, the anxiety hits. A creeping dread. Restlessness. A vague panic that something's wrong. You should be doing something. Productive. Useful. But nothing feels right. The freedom you craved all week now feels unbearable. And by Sunday evening, you're almost relieved that Monday is coming. At least then you'll know what to do. Sunday Neurosis. A term coined by Viktor Frankl to describe the anxiety and depression that surfaces when people have unstructured time. The absence of obligation creates a vacuum. And instead of rest, the vacuum fills with existential discomfort. Without external demands to organize life, the internal questions become unavoidable. What am I doing? What's the point? Why does none of this feel meaningful? It happens to people whose identity is built around productivity. Business becomes identity. Work provides structure, purpose, validation. When that structure disappears, even temporarily, The person feels lost. The weekend should be relief. Instead, it's destabilization. The symptoms are subtle. Not panic attacks, not clinical depression. Just a low-level unease. Difficulty relaxing. An inability to enjoy free time because the absence of pressure feels wrong. Some people fill weekends with errands, chores, side projects, anything to avoid the discomfort of doing nothing. Others sit with the anxiety, feeling it build until Monday rescues them. What it reveals is dependence. Not on work itself, but on the clarity work provides. Tasks, deadlines, expectations, a roadmap for how to be valuable. Without it, the person confronts a harder question: who am I when I'm not performing? And if the answer is unclear, the discomfort is overwhelming. Frankl saw it as a crisis of meaning. Modern life prioritizes achievement, productivity, output, but it doesn't teach people how to find meaning in rest, in presence, in existence separate from accomplishment. So when the demands lift, the foundation collapses. The person realizes they've been running so hard they forgot what they were running toward. Recovery requires relearning rest, not as laziness, as necessity, finding meaning that isn't tied to external validation, building identity beyond productivity. But that's hard work. Harder sometimes than the job itself, because it requires confronting the void business was designed to cover. Sunday neurosis isn't about hating weekends. It's about fearing the space where you're forced to meet yourself without distraction. Coovahd Syndrome. His partner is pregnant. She's dealing with morning sickness, fatigue, back pain. And somehow, inexplicably, so is he. He's nauseous in the mornings, exhausted for no reason. His back aches. He's gaining weight. There's no medical explanation. He's not pregnant. But his body is acting like he is. Coovahd Syndrome. Sympathetic pregnancy. When a partner, almost always male, experiences physical symptoms mirroring the pregnant person's condition. Nausea, weight gain, mood swings, food cravings, back pain, insomnia. The symptoms are real. The cause is entirely psychological. The mechanisms are debated. One theory, empathy, so strong it crosses into psychosomatic response. The partner is deeply connected to the pregnancy, emotionally invested, and the mind translates that emotional state into physical symptoms. Another theory, anxiety. Pregnancy brings massive life changes, responsibility, fear of inadequacy. The stress manifests physically, coincidentally aligning with pregnancy symptoms. Some researchers suggest hormonal shifts. Studies have found that expectant fathers show changes in testosterone and cortisol levels during their partner's pregnancy. Not as dramatic as the pregnant person's changes, but measurable. Whether those shifts cause symptoms or result from stress remains unclear. Culturally, Coovahd varies. In some societies, it's ritualized. Expectant fathers undergo symbolic practices, fasting or seclusion, to share the burden of pregnancy. In modern Western contexts, it's often unrecognized. The man experiencing symptoms doesn't connect them to the pregnancy. He thinks he's just unwell, coincidentally at the exact time his partner is pregnant. The symptoms typically resolve after birth. The nausea fades. The weight stabilizes. The fatigue lifts, which supports the psychological explanation. If it were purely medical, birth wouldn't be the trigger for recovery. But the moment the pregnancy ends, the sympathetic response does too. Socially, it's awkward. Complaining about pregnancy symptoms when you're not the one pregnant invites mockery. It seems attention-seeking. Trivializing. But for the person experiencing it, the discomfort is genuine. They're not faking nausea. They're not pretending to be exhausted. The mind has convinced the body it's sharing the pregnancy, and the body complies. Coovahd Syndrome doesn't mean the partner is actually pregnant. It means the psychological weight of impending parenthood has become so real it's rewriting physical experience. Post-holiday syndrome. The vacation was perfect. Beaks. Relaxation. no responsibilities, no stress. You recharged. You came back ready to face life again, except you're not. You're exhausted, unmotivated. The idea of returning to work feels unbearable. Everything that was tolerable before the trip now feels crushing. You had a break, and somehow you're worse. Post-holiday syndrome. The depression and anxiety that follow a vacation. It's not just missing the trip. It's a crash. The contrast between the freedom of time off and the constraints of normal life becomes intolerable. The routine you managed before now feels like a cage. And the recharge you expected didn't happen. You're depleted in a different way. Part of it is the re-entry shock. On vacation, time is yours. You sleep when you're tired. Eat when you're hungry. Move at your own pace. Coming back means schedules, alarms, obligations, deadlines. The autonomy vanishes overnight, and the loss feels heavier after tasting freedom. Part of it is unmet expectations. Vacations are sold as transformative, reset buttons, but they don't fix structural problems. The job that was draining before the trip is still draining. The relationship strain didn't disappear. The financial stress persists. The vacation provided temporary relief, not solutions. And realizing that the problems are still there waiting is demoralizing. Part of it is exhaustion masquerading as rest. Vacations aren't always restful. Travel is tiring. Navigating new places, managing logistics, social obligations if visiting family, keeping kids entertained. You return physically worn out. The trip was enjoyable, but it wasn't restorative. And jumping straight back into routine means no recovery time. The syndrome worsens when the vacation highlighted dissatisfaction. If the only time you felt happy was when you weren't working, that's data. If the only time you felt relaxed was away from home, that's information. The trip didn't create the unhappiness. It revealed it. And coming back means facing what the vacation temporarily let you escape. Treatment isn't another vacation. It's addressing what makes normal life unlivable. If work is the problem, maybe the job needs changing. If relationships are strained, avoidance isn't the answer. If the routine is suffocating, the routine needs restructuring. The vacation exposed the cracks. The crash afterward is the system demanding you stop ignoring them. Post-holiday syndrome isn't about the trip ending. It's about realizing the life you're returning to isn't one you want to live.